friends, and welcome to today's acrylic landscape lesson tutorial thing. Today we are going to do a landscape, but we're going to add a human element into it and something to just make it a little bit more fun. So today we are painting this little winter scene here with a bridge during the day. It's meant to be fun, exploratory, make you feel in the mood for the holidays. It was based off this painting right here. Earlier I asked what you wanted to see, if you wanted to see this in the daytime, if you wanted to see a winter version, and it seemed pretty unanimous that there was a demand for a winter daytime version. So we did that, and I'm honestly just really proud of it. So as per usual, if you'd like help with the drawing process, you can find the digital sketch up over on Patreon, and I would definitely recommend it for this one because we are working with a bridge, which is a structure which does require perspective, and it can make it a lot easier. But also you can find the full hour-long version up over on Patreon along with over 40 others, as well as winter reference photos and all of that. But as per usual, if you'd like any help with anything, please let me know. I'm here and happy to help. The book sale is still on. It is 25% off 25% off all ebooks. That got hard to say. But I would like to say, just before we get into this lesson, that I'm having a really, really nice start to the winter season, to the holiday season, and I hope you are too. I feel like it just breathed so much extra life into the creative process for me, and I wake up excited to make these paintings every day, and I hope you do too. So let's do this together, and let's have a great time. Again, if you need any help at all, please leave it a comment in the comment section down below, and I'm here and happy to do that. So let's jump into it. And I'm going to begin here today, as I generally do. I'm going to take my larger square-headed brush. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water. That way it is nice and damp. And now I can extend the wet life of my paint and drag it out farther. Now here I'm going to head over to my palette. I'm going to grab some primary blue and some titanium white. I'm going to grab about 2/3 titanium white, 1/3 primary blue. Mix up a nice bright blue here. I'm going to throw this on the bottom of my painting, right on the horizon of the sky, and I'm going to blend upwards, as you can see here. Now, as I start to run out of paint, I'm going to grab some extra water, head back over to my palette, and just continue it upwards. I'm not too concerned about painting over the trees because they were done with a fine-tipped black Sharpie, which will show through my first couple layers of paint. And I'm continuously going back to my palette here because, of course, it's making sure that I don't scrape out all the paint that I have on there and make anything too thin. Now here I'm grabbing about half and half primary blue and titanium white, making it a little bit darker, a little bit more blue. I'm going to apply this to the top of the painting, and I'm going to blend it across. This is going to create a slight vignette effect, make the edges and the top a little bit darker. That way the eye is drawn in towards the middle of the painting. Then I'm going to switch over to my medium-sized square-headed brush, which I'm going to dip in water. I'm going to head over to my palette. We're going to mix something for our mountains, our base layer, which is going to be our darkest layer of the mountains. And then we'll add highlights and midtones on top. So I'm going to start with some Mars Black. I'm going to grab about an equal mixture of titanium white. Mars Black's a bit of a stronger pigment, so as you can see it's a little bit darker, but that's okay, that's what we want. And I'm going to mark where the top of my mountain is going to be, and I'm going to create a nice stroke down from the top. I'm using the edge on the corner of this square-headed brush because it's so sharp, and I'm just going to blend down from there. Then I'm going to switch over to my smaller square-headed brush. I'm using this because I want to be a little bit more detail-oriented. That's why we keep switching from the square-headed brushes down to smaller ones, so that we can work with a little bit more detail. But we use these because they can hold a lot of paint, and because their nice sharp edges are fantastic for rendering sharp subjects like mountains. Now I grabbed a little bit more of our dark gray there. I'm applying it to the top of the mountain, and then I'm just blending it back down again. Light in the painting will be coming from this way, so these sides of the mountains will be a little bit darker than the left-hand side of the mountains, and that'll give it a little bit more depth. Then I'm going to grab some pure titanium white, head up to the top of my mountains and tap on some snow. I'll work it down the mountain in a couple of areas. I'll leave little openings. Just keep tapping. Have that snow run down the mountain. Give it some extra texture. And then also get lost in the fog and the snow, at which point I'm beginning to blend it a little bit and make it softer looking. So for the next step here, I'm going to grab my smaller square-headed brush, dip the tip of it in some water, and we're going to make some trees. Now, innately we think of trees as green, but I don't have any green on my palette, so we're going to mix some green by using primary yellow and primary blue. But we're going to make the trees a little bit more blue than green because they're in the distance, and when a subject is in the distance in a painting, it's going to receive a lot of atmospheric light, and the colors from the sky and the surroundings are going to reflect onto it, so we're going to get more of that color rather than the natural innate coloring. So I'm going to take a little bit of my titanium white, brighten it up. I'm going to take a little bit of my Mars black, darken it again. The two of them are going to make the pigment a little bit more gray, which is nice because in the distance we generally want things to be a little bit more desaturated. And I'm going to take some extra primary blue because again we want it to be more blue than green. There we go. Now I'm going to head into our trees, and I'm going to start from where I think the bottom of a tree may be, and then I'm going to move my brush upwards. And this is going to give me a nice sharp stroke. And when I apply my brush to the canvas, it creates kind of this square effect, but when I bring it up and I relieve pressure, I can create this nice little sharp point, which is great for the tops of these trees. Now, of course, these are trees out in this nice snowy scene, and they probably deserve some snow. So we're going to take our smaller square-headed brush, we're going to grab some titanium white, mix it with a hint of primary blue, a little bit more, titanium white, make it nice and bright, and I'm going to use the corners of my brush. I'm just going to tap on some snow onto the tops of the trees and then work it down. Now the next step in our painting is going to be this backline of trees here. And these are ones that are, I'd say, in the middle ground, so you can't see all of their detail, but you can see some of their detail. So they're quite important, and we want to get them right. And I'm going to begin all of them with the smaller square-headed brush for that reason. I'm going to do a lot of their edging with that, and then I'll go in and I'll fill in the middles of them with the medium-sized square-headed brush. I'm going to grab some primary blue. I'm going to grab about half that in primary yellow, mix those two together. It's a really nice color to begin with. We're going to begin with our darker version of it first, and then we'll add some midtones and highlights. So I'm going to add some Mars black and of course a hint of titanium white to desaturate it a little bit, but also thicken the pigment. So here I'm working on the edges first because I have a lot of fresh pigment here on my brush, and that's when I have the most opportunity to incorporate a detailed, delicate stroke. We're going to be adding snow to the edges of these trees, so they don't have to be perfect. And actually, it's great if you incorporate some inconsistency in them. You don't want both sides of the tree looking the same, and you want your trees at different heights, so that it looks like they're always evolving and changing. And I'm going to fill them in. Here we can paint over the trees in our foreground, but we don't have to. Here I'm being relatively clean, but there definitely is overlap, and that's okay. Now, I'm going to add some midtones to these trees. So I'm going to take some primary yellow, about half that of primary blue. We're going to mix up a brighter green this time, and some titanium white. And that is much brighter, so I can darken that a little bit. I'll grab some Mars black. There we go. Add a little bit more blue to it. And I'm mixing it again beside this one so that I have a good representation of what I'm going to be applying. So now I have a much brighter green, and I'm going to apply this to the left-hand side of my trees because the light's coming this way, and it's going to illuminate that side, and it's going to give it a bit of a highlight. So here I'm just going to be working on a bit of a tap on that left side, bringing out those nice highlights. I'm starting on the top of the trees, and then as I get down towards the bottom area, I let it dissipate. I apply less pressure, and that highlight just disappears. And that way, it creates a little bit more depth. And then, in the same line and stroke of the tree, the same way we applied the highlights, I'm going to apply some snow to the tops. And I'm going to do this on both sides for the most part, but I'm going to leave openings of green. And I want to make it look like the snow has fallen on these branches and is weighing down these branches to a point. So I'm going to switch to my medium-sized square-headed brush. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water. I'm using this because it will carry a little bit more paint. And for the ice, I'm going to grab some primary blue. I'm going to grab some Mars black, about half that primary blue in Mars black, and then I'll grab about a quarter titanium white. And this will make a nice grayish blue. So we're just going to adjust. I'm going to take some titanium white, I'm going to take some extra primary blue, mix those two together. And here we actually have our sky color, so I do have a good reference. And then I'm just going to paint over what we just did. It'll blend to a point, but I'm okay with that. We can always go back in and add more highlights should we need to. I'm using the sharp edge of my brush here to just work around all of those fairly sharp edges, but recognizing that I can just paint over this anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. I'm just trying to retain as much of the drawing as I possibly can. Here I'm just applying the paint however I can to get it all on there while it's nice and wet, and then I'm going to go back and forth in these horizontal strokes, smooth it all out, and then if there are any brush strokes showing through, they will show through in this horizontal fashion, which is okay, as it'll just look like a little bit of a reflection on the ice, which is neat. Now I need to take those same pigments, work them back here. Here you'll have a choice to make. You can either do some reflections of the mountains and the trees in the ice, or you can leave the ice to be its own pigment. All depends on what you want to do. And it can have a positive and it can have a negative. The positive is that you make another part of the painting a little bit more interesting. The negative is that you could potentially overcomplicate part of the painting. And that's something we really don't want to do. So, because I want the attention in the foreground, I'm not going to overcomplicate the background. And instead, I'm going to just do some highlights in the back. We mentioned that the light is going to be coming this way, and we'll add a little bit of that later on in the painting. But right now, I'm just going to take some extra titanium white, mix that in to our ice color so it's a bit brighter. I'm going to work that across the side there. There we go. And I can move it up here in the painting. Now there's going to be a bridge shadow right there, so I'm not going to make that too bright, but I can bring this forward here as well. It's of course blending with the rest of the paint, so it's getting a little bit more subdued, and I'm also applying it more so in the middle, and then as I get towards the edges I let it dissipate, so that way, as you can see, the edges are a little bit darker because they'll get a little bit of shadow from the land masses which are right beside them. Now we're going to move on to the next part of the painting, which is the trees, which are more so in the foreground. And I'm going to begin here by working on their edges with the smaller square-headed brush because they do need that detailed attention. I'm going to mix up a green for those trees. I'm going to take some primary blue, some primary yellow, about half and half now. We're getting more into the foreground so we get more of that natural coloring. I'll take some Mars black and a bit of titanium white. Remember, we work on the darker layers first and then we build up to highlights, so we need this green to be quite dark. And I'm going to begin here with this one, And I am going to move down as if the branches and foliage are in clusters because the snow has them kind of compact together. Now we can go in and mix our highlights for the left-hand side of our trees. So I'm going to grab my primary yellow, my primary blue. I'm mixing it on top of our previous highlight. I'm going to grab a hint of Mars black. And then a good amount of titanium white. As you can see, it's brighter than our previous one, so I will darken it by adding a little bit more green, which will kind of take away from the white that we have a prominent amount of. We'll add a little bit more yellow in there, getting closer. We'll add a hint of Mars black back in, and there we go. Those two pigments are now very similar, and we can add in our highlights. Starting on my edges, working my way in. Very similar to the snow, the tops of the branches are going to be receiving shadows from the branches above them. So we're going to put our base layer of the snow down, and this is going to be our darker layer. So our dark snow is going to be a mixture of primary blue, a similar amount of Mars black, and then about half that in titanium white. And here we have a fairly dark blue, and we want it to be fairly dark. We want it to be darker than the ice color. And now I'm just going to fill this in along our ice, and I'm going to begin working along the edge that touches the ice because I want it to be the most sharp. Now, I'm going to check, see if our darker snow is dry. It seems to be. And that means we can now start working on that. Now, for this, I'm going to mix the same color, so a lot of titanium white, a hint, just a hint, of primary blue. And I'm going to find areas that I think are going to be receiving a lot of light. The light's going this way, but it's also still the top of the sky. So here, we'll start in the back, and we'll work our way forward. Putting it on that edge, you can see it's brighter than the ice. And I'm just going to move back and forth, creating lots of little mounds of snow. And then where we want the light to really be hitting, we can add extra thick layers of the titanium white to really make it pop, like this. You see how easy that is? So much depth in our snow with a very simple technique. Now, for our next step in the painting, we're going to begin actually painting the bridge. So I'll grab some Mars black. I'll grab a hint of primary blue because it will get some cold reflected light on it. And then I'll also grab a hint of titanium white to thicken up that pigment. And that way we're not working with something that's too dark. As you can see, with the edge of the smaller square-headed brush, we're able to block that in with some nice sharp lines very easily, and then fill it in as well. I'm going to begin working on the next farthest part of the bridge here, which is the part that is overlapped by everything else, and that is this wall right here. So here I'm just going to mix in a little bit of extra titanium white, make it a little bit brighter, not too much, and then I'll fill that in. Now, before we begin adding snow and things like that to it, I would like to add some little bits of detail to this nice little bridge, and I'm going to do so by taking a slightly lighter gray and painting in some little bricks. Here you can see I'm just making lots of little rectangles with the smaller square-headed brush. From there, it's time to work on our little posts, and we're going to mix a very dark color for that. So we'll grab some of our Mars black, we'll grab a hint of titanium white, and I do mean a hint, we don't want much at all. And then, very delicately, we're going to start at the top and work our way down. Now I'm going to add some snow to the tops of these. So grab some titanium white, a little bit of primary blue. If the black is still wet, it will blend a little bit, so in that case, I'd implore you to let it dry for a second and then come back to it. Now for our next step in the painting, we're going to make sure that our water is completely clean, as is the brush we'll be using. I'm going to be using my smaller square-headed brush, and we're going to be applying light to all of these nice little lanterns here. I'm going to grab some primary yellow here. I'm going to grab some primary red, and we're going to need about 2/3 primary yellow to primary red, just because primary red's such a dominant color. We want hints of orange, but we don't want it to be too orange. And we're using the red just in case this pigment mixes with the blue, we won't get a green. Instead, it will still look fairly yellow and nice and warm as well. So here we're mixing all of that up. Then once we have something we're happy with, I'm going to grab some titanium white, make it nice and thick, and then we can head back over and apply it to our lights. Now I'm going to take a little bit of our orange-ish yellow. Need to make sure that it has some red in it because we're going to apply this now over our blue ice. And I don't want it turning too green. Here I'm going to do a bit of a pitter-patter back and forth, have it reflecting on the ice. And then this one can have it too right after the bridge here. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of black, move it down here on my palette, grab a lot of water, apply it there. Now you can see it's almost like watercolor, it's like a wash, and that's what we're going to use it as. It's just going to be a little glaze, a little wash here. Going to go under my bridge, and I'm going to move this out like this. Darken the ice a little bit. It's very watery. Go back, grab a little bit more. This time pure pigment, just because it's already so wet. And this will essentially create a very thin layer for you that won't disrupt any of your previous lines that you've made in your painting, and will retain some of the color underneath. It's easier than just mixing, or rather than having to mix, the old ice color and then making it darker. Hey there, it's Ryan O'Rourke. I truly hope you enjoyed today's little extra video. It was essentially a cut-up version of one of the many hour-long lessons which we offer over on patreon.com. Over there you'll also find digital sketches of the 10-minute painting lessons, digital sketches of these hour-long painting lessons, and a bunch of reference photos as well. So if any of that interests you, or if you just want to support the channel, go over there and check it out. It is a pleasure to make these long form videos, and I love to share them with all of you. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next Saturday with a new video, and above all, as always, stay creative.